mean, I thought yesterday was bad, and then today it's probably the worst it's been all year. Like sneezing, coughing, nose running like a tap, eyes streaming, etc. It's just been horrible. Anyway, welcome back to all of our viewers and listeners to another episode of Tell Me Where I'm Going Wrong. My name is Josh. I'm one of the hosts, and together with Sean, we host this weekly podcast. How are you, Sean?
I'm okay. I mean, people caught us at the beginning here moaning about allergies.
Oh my God. Like, I was just saying to Sean, my allergies, like hay fever, allergies, whatever you want to call it, it's, you know, it's baseline bad most days in spring, but today was next level. Today was like a whole new level of allergic reaction.
And
just horrible.
Talking about moaning about things, how cold is it today as well?
Oh my God. So I've just come home from work. I was working outdoors all day. So I don't know if it's just me over analyzing, but I feel like I look completely like my hair's all windswept. But I'm like, you know, when you're so cold that you go red.
Yeah.
Like flushed, that's how I feel. Like I was so cold. My fingers were tingling when I got home. When I got in the
very
warm.
red. You look very red.
I feel like I've got windburn.
You look like you've had those like sunbed goggles on because you're white around your eyes.
Oh yeah, it's true actually.
And it's really bright red.
I mean, I've been wearing my sunglasses.
Yeah, well, you
lately.
might be sunburned. Windburn. I
think, yeah. Is that a thing? Is windburn even a thing?
Yeah, I'm just putting cream on my lips because I went out and it was cold and windy, but also because it's freezing again. I had the heating on again last night, which I haven't had for a few weeks. And I've noticed as soon as I put the heating on, my lips just like crack.
Yeah, it just dries the air out so much, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, today I was just like, oh, what am I doing? Like it was so bitterly cold. And so, yeah, we had that false sense of hope last week when it was, we got up to about 29 degrees on one of the days. So it was like really, really lovely warm temperatures. And now it's just gone back to, horrible. No, I mean, it is dry and sunny mostly.
But it was when I was walking, I went for a walk. I was just telling you before we came on, I went for a walk around Spitalfields Market, which is, how do you describe that for people who aren't from London?
Well, it's just one of the many sort of gentrified markets in London now where it centres mostly around food. And yeah, I mean, there's like Camden Market, Borough Market, Spitalfields Market. They're mostly sort of like Brick Lane Market, they're mostly sort of food centred markets now. So it's, it's fun. It's nice, but it's very different to what it used to be.
It was, it started to rain a little bit while I was over there. But now it's blue skies. But
yeah, I heard thunder when I was outside earlier.
Okay.
So yeah, it's wild weather. But yeah, I feel like I look like a sailor or something. Like I look
a sailor.
Like wind-burned face.
Barnacle Bill. I went over to Spitalfields to look for this new restaurant site. Well, it's an old restaurant chain called Holy Carrot, and they did have that location in Knightsbridge, but I'm not sure if it's still there or not. And then they also had a food truck for a while. So for anyone who doesn't know, it's a vegan restaurant called Holy Carrot, and it was sort of on the fine dining end of the spectrum. But I'd heard a rumor that they were opening a new location in Spitalfields Market. So I went to look to take a photo for my blog. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm a vegan blogger, and I like to report on the comings and goings. There's a lot of goings. There's not many comings in the vegan scene.
Did you find the Holy Carrot?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
So it's in the... Do you know there's like old Spitalfields Market and new Spitalfields Market? Like it's divided into two sections.
No, I'm not sure if I knew that or not, but I haven't been there in so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's very fancy. I mean, there are stores like Starbucks and Flying Tiger and that sort of stuff, but some of the boutiques and restaurants and delis are, quite fancy. But there's a really nice vegan bakery stall that's in there on Saturday and Sundays. I've bought you a few things from there,
Oh
remember?
my God, I love that stuff. What are they called again? Polka
Polka
dot?
dot. Yeah, well, I say polka dot because my Australian accent, but you say polka.
Polka dot. Oh
Polka
my
dot.
God. What did you get me? It was like a stuffed cookie. So it was like a really thick, like, 5 centimeter thick chocolate chip cookie, but
Yeah, yeah.
inside was like chocolate fudge.
Yeah.
So, oh my God, it was
Well,
amazing.
their food is really good, but they're opening. But I want to give you a quick update. I don't know if I've told you this or not, but do you remember over near where you are, where we were on the weekend, that Benji's Buns,
Yes.
and it had shut?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a vegan bakery that served cinnamon buns.
Hmm.
And we tried to go. Hill, Josh, and I were over that side of town, and we tried to go there. Did I tell you this update offline?
No, no.
Oh, okay. Well, everyone can find out. So I went to try and investigate what happened to Benji's Buns online. I
Hmm.
wrote a blog post about it. But a few months ago, well, to start with, he had a second location that I didn't know about in Notting Hill.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
And then a few months ago, I saw some posts from a few months ago where he was saying he was relocating to another country and that he was trying to get someone to take over the lease of the Notting Hill bakery. And he
Mm.
was trying to sell the actual business in Ealing Broadway.
Oh, okay.
And then, so I started investigating, thinking, oh, this is a bit strange, like leaving the country, what's a bit mysterious. And then I
Hmm.
saw some posts like on TripAdvisor and elsewhere where people were sharing their outrage that he had been selling animal products in the store. So it was no longer a completely vegan business. But it was weird. It was like savory versions of cinnamon buns, but with egg and bacon on them. So we went from 100%. I don't even think you need to be vegan to find this bizarre, but he went from being a 100% sweet cinnamon bun bakery to being one that sold savory versions with egg and bacon
But
on.
he wasn't hiding the fact. He wasn't trying
No,
to pass them off as vegan or anything.
I don't think so, but there's a lot
But
of complaints online where people were trying to raise questions with him about it and why was he selling, and he was blocking people and deleting them. He wasn't answering anybody. So
hmm,
anyway, I found all that out.
scandalous,
And then
scandalous.
I found an Instagram account called Benji's Buns NYC. And he's relocating to New York City and reopening the bakery in New York City. I don't know if it's going to be vegan or not. I don't know what's going on. And then I found his his personal Instagram, and he's like holidaying in Dubai, and it looks like the most outrageous, unbelievable storyline from some sort of Netflix tele. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it
Uh,
sounds like the apple cider vinegar plot or
yeah,
something. Like, I mean, I, I don't. I feel like I can't really comment because I know nothing firsthand. All I know is just anecdotal stuff that I've heard. But I know that like a lot of people who I know in the local area were saying that had been doing some very strange posts on like local Facebook groups. I mean, this was going back about a year or so,
yeah.
trying to get people to come and support the business. But of course, I wish him well. To be
But what?
very,
So,
to be
sorry, just to go back. What sort of weird post was he doing?
like, I can't remember. I wish I could remember. I wish my recall was better. But regular viewers and listeners will know that it's not. But yeah, I remember people saying like he was just a bit strange, about in the way that he was trying to spruik his business. Um, but I wish him well, to be Gwyneth about it. But opening a cinnamon bun place in New York City, whether it's vegan, whether it's vegan or not, it just seems like a bit of a not such a great business plan. I don't know.
If you go back and look at some of the early press around him opening that
Mm,
store in Ealing,
mm,
it was his story, his brand messaging or story was that he got into baking cinnamon buns to help him recover from PTSD. and that's the powerful message behind
that's it. Because I was saying, people were saying in local Facebook groups, it was a bit strange the way he was trying to sort of market it or something. Yeah, that was it. That was it. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. This goes into all sorts of gossip now. People are leaving comments on my blog, so you can go and read it if you want. So I'm not going to say any more about it.
I'm going to check it out. Yeah, we should probably leave it there for the podcast. Maybe.
I mean, maybe we'll put a link to this blog post. I mean, it's not an in-depth blog post. It's everything I've just mentioned here, but other people are commenting with their own opinions or experiences or like theories on what's going on. But it's very odd, and the photos of him holidaying in Dubai on these super yachts and stuff, and then moving to New York City. I don't know, maybe he's married somebody, and it's all very strange. But
Benji, we wish you well.
Oh, Ben. Cinnamon, you and your Benji buns.
So this past week, Sean and I had some really, really sad news. Sorry to take a sad and depressing term, but one of our favourite singers, who I'm sure we've mentioned on this podcast before many times, Jill Sobule, she sadly died in a house fire last Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday night, and it really hit me and Sean hard. I think we have seen her live countless times. Like, I actually couldn't count the amount of times we've seen her live in the different cities and different types of venue, and we've chatted to her a lot of these shows, before, after, during the show. I think maybe once didn't we sort of sit by the merch stand with was it
oh my god,
what was his name?
Completely forgot about that.
At the Joe's Pub show in New York.
Yeah, we helped run the
what was the guy's name who did a lot of that stuff with her? You know the one, Tony. Yeah, so we sat with Tony on the merch stand and stuff. So anyway, we were really, really sad. She was 66 years old, and she was one of those people who we just thought we would, continue to see live in one form or another, for the rest of our lives. And she just, she disappeared on Wednesday.
I mean, if you're not completely familiar, or to give you a little bit of a backstory on how I became aware of Jill Sobule, in 1995, I believe it was, or the mid-90s, after having one album that wasn't super successful, Jill had some mainstream success. She had a hit song called I Kissed a Girl, and it was a massive hit in Australia, and it was quite a big hit all around the world. A very sort of bubbling under or college radio sized hit, but it was a very big hit in Australia. And then around the same time, she also had another hit song called Supermodel, which was featured in the movie Clueless. And not only was it associated with the movie, but it had quite a pivotal scene featured, didn't it? It was in the movie. And so these were two really big hits. Jill used to joke a lot that she was offended by being called a one-hit wonder when she was a two-hit wonder.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was, how many years ago was that? 95? Is that?
That's 30 years ago.
Yeah, so 30 years ago that I became a fan. I can remember having Supermodel and I Kissed a Girl CD singles way back then. When did you become familiar with her music?
When we saw her at the House of Blues in Vegas in 99. Was it 99? Or no, 2000, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, 2000.
And I think I can remember saying to you, this is Jill Sobule. And I think maybe leading up to that, I had bought one or two of the CDs to re-familiarize myself with her music, but I'm not sure you had known her around the 95 mark, had you? Or
no, I don't think I was familiar with her until you introduced her to me.
And then we got to speak to her at that first show.
And, she was hilarious. I mean, and this is a thing, this is what I've been trying to sort of explain to people that don't know who she is is that a lot of her fans, she was so friendly and so open and accessible to her fans that we all, and I know this does sound like a really creepy parasocial sort of thing, but we almost feel like we've lost a friend as well, which is kind of silly. But if you knew her, if you'd met her, and if you'd been a fan of hers, I think you'd understand that she was so just forthcoming and so open with people. She seemed to love it. She seemed to really thrive on that. She
Yeah.
would tour mostly in the US. She would tour and she would go and stay at people's houses. Like fans would um, book her to play a house gig, so she would come and play in their house. And they could, well, I mean, if you had the money, you could just do it for yourself, just do a private show. But if you wanted to like sell tickets for it,
Hmm.
you could pay her to do the show and then you could make the money back that way. So she just had such a close, she really, really developed that relationship with her fans to the point where most of the fans that I know and that we know felt very much like sort of not friends, but like pals, like,
Yeah.
and so yeah, when we got the news that she died, it felt, obviously when you're a fan of somebody and they die, obviously it's upsetting, but this felt like an extra layer of sadness and loss.
Well, it
Um,
was also the tragic nature
yeah,
of her death. I mean, to think of somebody burning to death is just horrible.
yeah,
And the fact that she was staying with friends who were able to get out of the house, but I think I saw a quote the other day saying they thought that she had gotten out, but then
right.
when they realised that she hadn't gotten out, they weren't able to get back into the house.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just awful. It's just it's still now, even just thinking about it, it doesn't seem real to me that she's not around anymore, and it's a really hard thing, it's classic grief, isn't it? It's classic sort of inability to grasp the fact, the fact that we're all mortal and that one day we won't be around, at least in not in this form anyway. And so
yeah, and I think also what is so poignant about it is that Jill was a perfect example of not measuring your success or your joy based on other people's metrics.
yeah,
So
very
she
true.
didn't have top 10 albums. She didn't have sold out arena tours. She wasn't a household name,
Hmm.
but it was really it like if you were going to measure success through authenticity, I mean, she was the most successful person I know.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And for me as well, like not only had we sort of met her many times over the years, but when COVID happened and I just moved back from Mexico and moved back in with my mum in London, and I had always wanted to pursue music. I'd
Yeah.
always wanted to write songs, record songs, be a musician, and I'd never really gotten my head around that, like how to do it, when to do it. I just had no clue. And Jill, within like a week of lockdown being announced, Jill had emailed all her fans and said, "Hey, I'm thinking of running an online songwriting course. Is anyone up
Yeah.
for that? Like, it's pay whatever you want. There's no
Hmm.
set fee or anything." And I did the course. I think it was, I can't remember how many weeks. I think it was like maybe 6, 8 weeks, something like that. I'm not sure. And we would all get online once a week. And that's what I mean. She was just so accessible. And that, I credit that course with sort of basically flicking a switch or igniting a fire within me for changing something abstract like the idea of being a songwriter and doing music to
Yeah.
something concrete and real. I really credit her and that experience with
Were
with
were
changing
any
my
of
life.
the songs that came out of that experience, do they exist? What did you write during that time?
I wrote a few. I mean, that one I haven't recorded it, but the one uh I forget the name of it. My lonely heart's lost on a red London
Oh
bus.
yeah,
You
I
know that
remember.
one.
Yeah.
And then another one in my room. And these are ones I haven't recorded, but it just the way she presented songwriting and demystified it for us, I just think it was so pivotal. And I mean, I know it sounds dramatic, but I do credit that experience with as being a very, very life-changing moment for me. And I told Jill that I saw her 3 years ago, I think, when I was in LA. I went to see, she was working on she had teamed up with someone to write the songs for a musical called Fuck Seventh Grade. Mm-hmm. And I went to see a preview screening of that in LA, and I spoke to her before the show, and I said, I'm recording music now, and it's all really thanks to you and that course. And it's just it was a huge loss for us.
Yeah. Do you remember that time where we were chatting to her about another musical or a piece of theatre she was working on? Something about, was it the Prozac and the Platypus, or the Platypus and the Prozac?
Yeah.
And I can remember her jokingly saying to me, "Oh, because you're Australian, could you come down and do the voice of the platypus in the song?"
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember thinking she was joking, and I just laughed it off. And she was like, "Oh, no, come down." And she yelled out to whoever was there, "Hey, this guy's got to come and do the platypus." And I just was, I don't know what was wrong with me, not together enough to actually insist and like, how cool would that have been?
She totally would have, that's it. Like, she was so, there was no, I don't know. It was. I mean,
she would have been very sorry if I'd shown up and tried to sing.
Like, yeah, that's true. That's true.
But an actual real platypus would have been being able to carry a tune better than me.
Perhaps, yeah. She was just very authentic, and she just carved out this really sort of interesting niche for herself. She toured a lot. She had so many different sort of projects happening. Like, we mentioned the musical. She wrote for a TV, like for a children's TV show for a while on Disney Channel or something.
No, it was on Nickelodeon.
Oh, sorry, Nickelodeon. Mm-hmm. She just kind of did things her own way. She didn't seem to really give a shit or give a fuck about sort of trying to follow any traditional path in the music industry. And she just did it so well, and she connected with people so much. So yeah, it's hard to sort of explain how, the role that she played to her fans, and how we feel we've lost, an amazingly talented person, but also we've lost a buddy,
Yeah, well, I did try to express my feelings in a blog post. I've already said, we'll link to about 7 things already, but I don't know if we could link to my blog post. I mean,
we'll put it in there.
What else are we linking to? We're linking
to the Benji's Buns blog post as well.
Oh, okay. But the Jill blog post was very emotional. Your microphone keeps making a weird sound, I think.
I was about to say your microphone keeps making a weird sound.
I think it was when you picked up that water.
No, really. I thought it was your microphone hitting your beard or something.
Maybe it is quite pushy, but anyway, that's. I think if anybody is familiar with Jill,
now you sound really far away. I think you need to move your mic back.
I moved it from my beard.
Yeah, that's better. That's
okay.
Better.
Well, I think anyone who is familiar with Jill will understand the sentiments that we're sharing, and anyone who is not, maybe it's a good time for them to explore her music.
Yeah.
It got me thinking when I was thinking about Jill, and obviously over the last few days have thought about her a lot. It got me thinking about other people that I really enjoy their art, but I don't connect with as much anymore, or I don't sort of look them up as much as I used to. And I wonder why that is. Like, what has changed with the way we consume art? Like, we're really force-fed stuff, aren't we?
We are. And there's just, we're bombarded. There's so much content in all forms of media, I think. We're just bombarded with stuff. And so, yeah, you do kind of, things fall out of favor, when, especially now that we don't have physical, I don't. Yeah, I know you have some vinyl, but we don't have physical copies of stuff anymore. It's mostly digital. So you kind of you forget about people, you forget about artists. Like, there would have been albums that you'd have listened to 100 times, and then you completely forget that it exists, and then one day you're like, oh yeah, I haven't listened to that album for 4 or 5 years or whatever.
Well, I did it. I did it the other day when I was thinking about Jill. I thought, oh, what are some other, artists? Who are some other artists that I want to reconnect and see where they're what they're up to? And I thought of Amani Coppola.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah.
And people might remember she had a bit of a almost hit with a song called "Legend of a Cowgirl," and she's had a lot of records. And she used to do a lot. Well, she still does a lot of home recording and releases stuff completely independently. And she had, I think, an album like 2 years ago or a year ago. She had another musical band that she was part of as well, or a performance act. And yeah, she's still doing things completely independently and releasing music. But it's just, you just don't keep up with stuff, do you? It's hard to.
No, it's hard. It is hard. But yeah, Jill was. I mean, I'm trying to think of some of like the highlights of times we've seen Jill, and it's hard to narrow it down. But like, I remember, I don't know if did we see her twice at the House of Blues in Vegas. I've kind of
No, I think I've only seen her once at there.
Okay, and that was, I think you said in your, I don't know if you said this in your blog post or maybe it was in something on Facebook. That was the night we also met our friend Lynn. It was all.
Well, I didn't mention Lynn. I said that in the Facebook post because she was working with Donna DeLore. But we saw Jill a couple of times at Largo in LA.
Once with my dad, I think.
Yeah,
my dad one time.
Your dad came along and he found it interesting because Jill was Jewish. And she had a bit of Jewish content in her.
Oh yeah. She definitely played up on a lot of the Jewish cultural references and stuff like that.
What was her Christmas song? Jesus was a dreidel
spinner. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so my dad, being of Jewish background, enjoyed that.
Do you consider yourself Jewish?
It's tricky. No, I don't really. I mean, certainly wasn't raised. I mean, my mum's not Jewish, so in Judaism, the Jewishness has to be passed on through the mother. So I mean, my mother's not Jewish, so no, I'm not Jewish. But even notwithstanding, I wasn't raised in a Jewish way at all. I wasn't raised under any denomination, religious or cultural, really. So I don't consider myself Jewish. I consider myself Jew-ish, you know what I mean? Like Jew-ish.
Right.
In that, there's a lot of Jewish cultural stuff in the family, perhaps, but not in any true, real, tangible sense, no. But my dad, go on.
Can people become Jewish, convert to?
Yeah.
Like, but you're saying it has to be your mom, but how does that work then? How is that recognized?
Well, I think I don't feel like I'm qualified to talk on it too much, but that's
as a non-Jew Jew.
As a Jewish Jew, but it's never stopped me before. But I believe, you can convert, anyone can convert to Judaism, but I think there is within certain Jewish communities, there is the idea exists that, you're not a true Jew. So, if some families might think that if their child was going to marry somebody who wasn't born to a Jewish mother, that wouldn't be a good marriage, sort of thing, But I don't know. I don't have a lot of direct experience with that, but that's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, my dad wasn't raised religiously as a Jew, but he grew up with two parents who obviously had been, who were Jewish. And so, I think my dad appreciated the Jill Sobule show. But yeah, it's speaking of Judaism. I know you told me, well, a few people told me actually to watch it, and so I did. You told me to watch that Louis Theroux documentary
Yeah,
about Gaza and about it's called The Settlers. I
yeah,
don't know, in the UK it's available on iPlayer, on BBC iPlayer. I don't know around different regions of the world. I don't know where it is available, if it's available and where. But if you can watch it, I think it's definitely worth watching.
yeah, for
Um,
sure. It's very interesting. But before we dive into, I mean, it's such a seamless segue to talking about your Jewish history to about settlers in the West Bank. But
mhm.
Louis Theroux, for people who don't know, is a journalist who has become famous for doing these sorts of very bare and open, everything laid bare. I don't know, what do you call it? What's that type of style of interviewing people?
um, yeah, I don't know what you would call that. It's very sort of no holds barred, but he typically will go into fringe groups of people in society,
Hmm.
present as like this affable kind of foppish, affable English man, um, but then try and sort of like befriend them, get to know them, and
Yeah.
then kind of try and critique in a very sort of subtle, often a somewhat subtle way, their beliefs, or their lifestyle.
Well,
Often,
it's done quite well in that he doesn't generally lead doesn't appear to be leading anybody down a particular way of thinking, or he doesn't seem to even be editing the show to give a point of view of his,
yeah,
but he
yeah,
allows enough space for the subjects to tell their
yeah,
story and to present a side.
and
And
and often it's his silence is where his judgment is. He
yeah,
won't necessarily directly combat somebody's beliefs or opinions, but he will just sort of let the impact of their statement settle with some silence in as a form of sort of, I suppose, judgment or
yeah,
reflection. I I'm not a huge fan of his, to be honest. I find some of his documentaries I find very good. He's done some podcast things which I've not found so good. I find in his podcast stuff he's inserted a lot of himself into the narrative. Whereas I think with his documentaries he does the opposite.
fancy having a podcast and talking about yourself and your
I
feelings.
know, I know. Imagine that.
But did you know who his cousin is?
Uh, his cousin is. I do know this. Hang on. Well, who's is it? His granddad or his father or his granddad was the author, right?
I don't know.
And
I don't know about that.
why don't you do a little live research? But who's his cousin?
His cousin is Justin Theroux, who was in Mulholland Drive
Yes, yeah,
and
yeah,
used
that's
to be
right.
in a relationship with Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was a guest on his podcast once, on
Oh,
Louis'
was he? Okay.
podcast. Yeah,
Well,
it was great.
I'd stop listening by that point.
You were too incensed by
Yeah,
the ego.
yeah. But no, his grandfather, I feel. I don't know. Why don't you do a little live research?
You're normally so
Was
against the live research.
No, I know, but I feel like it's an important part of the background. Um, but yeah, anyway, he's mostly known for his documentaries, which generally are very hard hitting, impactful, and insightful. I think they
Okay.
expose interesting parts of society, particularly in the fringes of society.
Yeah.
Um,
I thought he was a lot older than me, Louis Theroux, but he's only 4 years older than me.
okay,
I thought he was. I mean, I'm not saying he looks older. I just had a feeling that he was older than me.
yeah,
But he was born in Singapore. Um, I mean, he gives a bit of a posh vibe, doesn't he?
yeah, yeah.
And I'm just trying to. His father was Paul Theroux,
Paul, yeah.
and what did Paul Theroux is an American novelist and travel writer.
Mm-hmm. Did he do was it Around the World? Was that Paul Theroux?
The Great Railway Bazaar. He did that. But anyway, here's Justin Theroux is his cousin. His uncle is Alexander. I don't know who some of these people are.
Okay.
Anyway, but he's got a lot of. I mean, it sounds very is nepotistic a word?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like a bit of that. But anyway, going back to the documentary, The Settlers, which is shown on the BBC here in the UK, I'm sure people have loaded it up to YouTube, and for some reason there doesn't seem to be as much demand to take it down. I think maybe there's an understanding by the production company that they're more interested in people seeing it than they are about policing the because I actually watched it on YouTube. And and it was there that video had been there a few days, and normally the BBC would have stuff taken down.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it is a very, very vital piece of journalism that should be, not decimated. What's the word? Disseminated. Should be disseminated to as wide an audience as possible. So basically, it looks at the notion of sort of these settlers in Israel who are encroaching on Palestinian territory, on Palestine, and basically bit by bit ousting Palestinians from their land. And obviously, I don't think anyone listening or watching needs to understand just how relevant that is at the moment with the invasion of Gaza. So the documentary takes place close to Gaza, but not in Gaza. But it looks at this very Zionist movement of Israeli Jews who are, well, actually not all Israeli Jews. There are a lot of American Jews who moved to Israel, who are pursuing this settlement ideology of, claiming land and bit by bit encroaching and essentially ridding Palestine of Palestinians. I mean, that's essentially what the goal is.
Yeah. It was quite distressing. It's not as violent as I think it could have been. There was some imagery that was a little more difficult to watch, I suppose, that showed some violence, but a lot of it was just spoken about because, it was, they wanted as many people to watch it as possible, I suppose, so they kept the images of violence to a minimum. But it was so shocking to see something that we've all heard about just so clearly displayed, and that is the segregation of communities, the what do you call when people are forced to live in closed areas? What's the terminology for that?
I don't know what the term is, but it's like a stratification of society. So it's creating two classes of citizen, basically, and I suppose it's so timely because at the moment with the war in Gaza and the invasion of Gaza, so much focus and attention is on the really extreme overt forms of violence. So, actual bombing of civilians, killing of civilians, starving of civilians, bombing of hospitals, etc. But this is a much more nuanced and subtle way of all the ideology that props up that invasion.
Well, isn't it weird that we think of it as a more subtle way, but when you look at it as a standalone act of aggression and oppression, it's not really subtle or nuanced.
Well, no, only in the sense when you compare it to the actual bombing of Gaza.
Yeah,
only then. But
you're looking at people violently being driven from their homes.
Yeah,
people physically being detained, beaten, sometimes killed by security forces.
Yeah, shot at by civilians with no consequence.
Yeah, having having your movement restricted, not being able to walk down certain streets, having to pass through security checks,
Yep.
sometimes being denied entry
Yep.
to
Having
certain
guns
parts.
pointed at you, yeah, it just.
So, comparing it to what's going on in Gaza. So even though Gaza and the West Bank are two different parts and they're separated by uh, Israel, and they're getting both of those areas are getting continually smaller and smaller, either through bombardment, with warfare tactics, or through these settler tactics. And so they're two sides of this same coin of like systemic oppression.
Yeah, the systemic oppression and displacement of people. And just before we jumped online to record this, I read a headline. I haven't even had time to click on the article yet, but I just read a headline that Benjamin Netanyahu has basically said Israel is going to relocate Gazans. I haven't clicked on it to see where they plan to relocate them to, but it's just this relentless disregard for Palestinian people, this dehumanization of Palestinians is, I mean, I struggle to find the words, really. I particularly given the history of Jews in the last century, I struggle, and Louis does sort of does state this, or does sort of explain this, or he does articulate this in a sense. It's shocking that a people that have undergone such persecution in the last century are now the ones committing equally horrific acts of persecution and dehumanization, and killing of people as well. I mean, it's actually very hard, I think, to just get your head around it. It's shocking.
What was quite scary for me, I don't mean scary like I was in fear, but I suppose startling is a better term, were when they were showing people coming from the US and claiming Israeli citizenship through birthright, but then also joining the settler movement. So people who were born and raised in, say, Texas, moving to Israel, getting citizenship through birthright, and then using violent and what do you call
intimidation?
Intimidation tactics to push Palestinians from their land.
Yep.
And these people are walking around with semi-automatic rifles and weapons, and it is so startling and bizarre to me, but it's also very reminiscent of a lot of that hyper religion and rhetoric that goes on with Christian fundamentalists in the US. Do you know what I mean? Like it was reminiscent of that.
I thought, this may go off on a bit of a tangent here, because I think we should, if we're going to talk about it, we should focus on the ideologies and stuff. But just as a slight sort of aside, I came away from that thinking about the American citizens who'd moved there, and I thought, I suspect that in some part it's a response to modern life, and I think, in the same way that there are a lot of MAGA people in the US, a lot of people who, even though, I mean, the whole MAGA movement, I mean, it's bullshit, like Make America Great Again, like it was never a great place to start with. But this false hope of getting back to a simpler kind of life. And I think in some part that may just be a response to modern life. I mean, modern life is rubbish. We've said that. We've had a whole discussion about that on the pod before. Modern life is rubbish. Like we are just caught in this endless cycle of digital in shitification.
Yeah,
And
you love that term. You haven't used that in a while.
I love enshittification. It's a great word. And you can see why some people crave a simpler form of existence. Like I crave
Yeah,
it sometimes. I don't know if I've said it here on the pod, but I've said to you in the past, like sometimes I fantasize about getting stranded on a desert island because all of the bullshit, like, all of
yeah,
the letters from the fucking bank that I need to read and, act decisively on, or, you know, things that need paying, or, fucking dentists, whatever, like all of that modern life, all the minutiae of modern life is exhausting and
yeah. But
ridiculous.
you wouldn't imagine it ever pushing you to take part in a genocide or
Not
the
mm,
relocation of entire people.
not me personally, no, but I can see how people, especially if you've been raised in a Judeo-Christian kind of society like the US, um, the notion of going back to the Holy Land, as it's called, and forging an existence there, living a simpler life. I can see why some people are buying into that. Obviously, I don't condone it, but I think that plays a role in it. Um,
What is the attraction apart from that? Apart from you that idea that you think people are looking for to simplify or get on all this hokey tiny house vibes. You know that a lot of white people seem to be obsessed with tiny homes, and
mhm,
it's
mhm.
such a it's such a it seems to me to come from a place of confusion or lack of direction or lack of meaning.
But again, I think it's a response because we've talked loads about capitalism and consumerism on this pod, and I think there is I think we all know it's all bullshit. We know capitalism is bullshit. We know material wealth is bullshit. And yet it's something we all, to some extent, more or less, buy into it. We
Yeah.
all are on the hamster wheel. Um, and so again, I think, a response to that might be, oh, I'm going to go live off the land. I'm going to go to the Holy Land. I'm going to live a simpler life. I'm just going to have like, a family and have loads of children and just live like fucking biblical times, like it's a response to a society that has become too focused on a lot of bullshit.
But there are people who see it as what they were born to do. So even if it's not even related to what you're talking about, they see it as their divine birthright to
Mm-hmm.
do these things.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's really scary to me is when you
Mm-hmm.
have these sorts, they'll do anything because there is no alternative to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and the ideology is terrifying, and that I don't I don't want to give away one of the sort of pivotal critical scenes in the documentary towards the end, but there's a woman in it called Daniela Weiss, who is a very active political figurehead for the settler movement, and has been for many, many decades. And she's a real sort of instigator of, and what's the word? Fire. What's the term? Fire, not firebrand. Like fire starter. But you know what I mean? Like she really.
a twisted fire starter.
That's a Prodigy reference for those who didn't get it. Um, she ignites and incites extreme actions, and
Mhm.
she's been put on a lot of like sort of dangerous lists in over the years. But if you watch the documentary, but there's a really powerful scene in that where she is trying to provoke a response from Louis and doesn't get it, and is trying to use that to justify her actions or the actions of Israel, the actions of Netanyahu. Um, yeah, it's a very stark reminder of just how fucked up the situation is.
And to be clear, this isn't just your opinion and my opinion. There are numerous international bodies that recognize and state that what is happening in the West Bank is in violation of international law, international human rights law.
Yeah.
It is an extension of an annexation of the genocide that's happening in Gaza. So, like, that's what I was saying before. It's like two sides of that same coin of systemic oppression against Palestinians. This is recognized by numerous organizations that deal in keeping track of human rights violations. So this isn't just you and me saying, hey, we don't like this, this isn't cool. This is like a horrendous historical ongoing oppression and destabilization of an entire population.
Oh yeah, correct. And many governments around the world have tried to bring the state of Israel to court over their actions in Gaza, and there is widespread global condemnation of Israel's actions, and yet nothing seems to change. It's I don't think words exist to really fully do justice to the tragedy that occurs every single minute of every day in Gaza.
And also in the West Bank and that part, because living in a military state where you look out your window and there are guns pointed at your house where you live with your children, and you can't walk down the street, you can't get to work or school or hospital or without being surveilled.
But what do you think is the solution? And we could look at just this situation with Israel and with Palestine, but you could also zoom out to a larger, to a bigger picture discussion. What is the solution? How do we find peaceful resolution to conflict when one group of people or one nation or one group of nations or whatever have a historical fight or ongoing fight or conflict with another group of people, and you can sort of keep going back and back. Well, they did this first, and then they did this in response, and then it just kind of goes back and forth. How do we, or can we find peaceful conflict resolution in those cases, or are we just doomed as a species to just fight each other until we just destroy ourselves and the planet? I mean, what do we do?
Well, we are doomed, but apart from that, I think the only route that these sorts of conflicts have in reality is based in international pressure. There doesn't seem to be, doesn't seem to be a way to solve it internally or within that group of countries or societies. It seems to take international pressure. And I mean, all of the really, really large conflicts that have happened on the planet have ended or have changed once international forces have come on board, or whether that be with military intervention or whether that be with
this is it though, isn't it? It's like most times in history, at least most times there has to be military action to stop one group of people persecuting another group of people,
or sometimes it can be other forms of trying to get them to bend their will, like through things like, I mean, I don't like the word tariffs because of what Trump has done to it.
Like boycotts and
boycotts and financial incentives.
But there doesn't seem to be, okay, in an ideal scenario for me, in my opinion, an ideal scenario would be that, the international community would condemn Israel and exclude Israel from international trade and put pressure on to the point where that Israel had no choice but to back down. However, my problem with that is that doesn't change the ideology. It's the ideology of people like Daniela Weiss that needs to be changed, or the settlers, who moved to Israel from the US. How do you deal with conflict that goes back generations or goes back centuries? How do you draw a line in the sand? I find it so sad and depressing and dispiriting
Mm-hmm.
to think, because yeah, like, I'm not obviously saying this justifies, there is no justification for what's happening in Gaza, but a lot of Israelis say, well, look at what happened on October 7th, um, and what Hamas did, and they use that as justification, and then Hamas would quite rightfully say, yeah, but look at what Israel did, and it just goes on and on, and
But
how do we find resolution here?
yeah,
How
I don't know, but I what I find very dispiriting and very upsetting is anybody who thinks that this level of violence is somehow justified. So, regardless of what you think the solution might be, or
hmm.
who was wrong, or who was right, or how it started, that anybody can, and some of these settlers were of the mindset that whatever action needs to be taken was justifiable.
Yeah, and
And
there were, in this documentary, there were rabbis using horrible, horrible terms to describe Palestinians, and it's, to me, it really hurts my heart, or it really hurts my spirit to think that, particularly people, religious people, like, but anyone, but particularly people who are taking leadership roles in religion, denigrate people like that, especially in a Jewish community where it's so recent in human history that Jews have been persecuted and
yeah,
denigrated and turned into not even second class citizens, like fourth class citizens,
mm,
killed en masse. How can people, in the name of Judaism, in the name of Zionism, carry out the same sort of crimes? Like,
well,
it just.
the same way that I suppose under the moniker of being a Christian country, that the US and allies went in and killed 1 million Iraqis, in
Mm.
the war on terror. It's people think that they have God on their side that allows them to do whatever they want and without recourse.
Yeah,
Uh,
it I find it so, yeah, beyond words, actually.
and what I think a lot of people struggle to understand, or actually, I don't think a lot of people struggle to understand this. I think it's very clear that you can be for the protection of Jewish people, but you can also be against the actions of the
The
Israeli
state of
state
Israel.
and
Yeah.
the
Yes,
Israeli Defense
and that
Forces.
was that was one of the positives, I think, in that documentary, is that they do show there are lots of Israelis who demonstrate on a daily basis against the settlement and against the actions of the Israeli military, and
Hmm.
that I found very heartening, I suppose, because I do think there are a lot. There's such polarization in society in general.
Hmm.
In all sectors of society, we look at things in such binaries, and things are so polarized. But one of the common misconstrued ideas out there is that Zionism and Judaism are the same thing, and they're clearly not. I think
Hmm.
most people understand that you can be Jewish,
Yeah.
whether you're Israeli Jew or not an Israeli Jew, and you can be a Zionist, but the two are not, they do not go together.
Hmm.
Um, and I know that, there's a lot of nuance to it, but I know that in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn, who was the leader of the Labour Party, he was a politician. He is a politician. And he came under a lot of public criticism within his party and within the Conservative Party, of course, over some of his anti-Zionist ideas and beliefs,
Yeah.
and people were misconstruing that as being anti-Semitic, and it's not. I think I'm explaining the obvious to people here, but
Yeah.
um, it's
Well, do you know, have you seen all this stuff going on with the that hip hop band from Northern
From
Ireland,
yeah, yeah.
Kneecap, and about how they're a hip hop, they're irreverent, they're sort of a bit punky, and
Hmm.
they have been very outspoken for human rights, but some of the things they say can be framed as quite problematic in the the way they deliver their message can be
Yeah,
very
yeah.
confrontational and it upsets people. And so when they performed, I think was it at Coachella, and they made some statements in support of Palestine. There is now a lot of kickback against them. People are finding old clips of them saying inflammatory or um, aggressive things
Yeah, like in
against,
things that seem to be sort of inciting violence towards
yeah,
people, politicians, etc. And yeah.
politicians or the state of Israel. And it's it's a bit of a strange situation because I agree with their sentiment, but I don't necessarily agree with walking around saying that you should people should be violent towards public figures. It's not something that I think is helpful or but a lot of other artists have come on board and signed an open letter in support of Kneecap.
Hmm.
And, lots of people like Shirley Manson and I mean, too many to list, dozens and dozens and dozens of artists. But
Hmm.
the letter is very strange in that when I read it, I thought they're not saying they're standing up for people's right to stand up for Palestine. They're saying they're standing up for Kneecap's freedom of speech.
Hmm.
And that didn't quite sit right with me, and I couldn't put my finger on what I didn't like about it. But then Billy Bragg came forward. Did you see his statement?
I saw that he'd said, I haven't had time to read it yet, but
Yeah, he said that he supports Kneecap, and obviously they're aligned a lot politically, but he wouldn't sign that letter that ignored the nuance of the fact that there are consequences for free speech, and that if you want to say things that contain violent rhetoric, there can be consequences for that. People might not want to associate with you, and that's their
hmm.
right. That's their free speech. So he said he wasn't going to sign that letter, and
Mm.
that just summed it up perfectly how I felt about it. Like
Mm.
I don't necessarily think they should be banned from every music festival, but I don't run music festivals. So if there's
Mm.
somebody that has taken offense or has had
Hmm.
their feelings hurt or their sensitivities impacted upon, that is the reality of standing up and saying how you feel.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's just reality of free speech. There are consequences of free speech. Now, if they were being ostracized from the music industry just for saying that Gaza shouldn't be genocided, yeah, 100%. I couldn't see
Yeah.
any other way around it. But
Yeah.
I
And
felt that,
I mean, it's. I'm sure there have been politicians killed in every country or most countries around the world, but I think particularly in the UK we're hyper vigilant or hyper aware of it because I don't know how many years ago now. It's probably about 6 years ago now that Jo Cox was a member of Parliament who was killed by one of her constituents, and so I think there is a hyper sort of vigilism around anything that incites violence towards politicians.
yeah,
I think has an extra level of scrutiny around it because of that. Um,
and it's more complex than even that because this band being from Northern Ireland, from Belfast, there is the history of actual violent extremism
yeah.
being used against uh, British or English politicians, right? I mean, this is a
Mm.
real thing from the last
Oh
few
yeah,
decades.
yeah.
So, I mean, there probably were people injured. There was an attempt on Margaret Thatcher's life.
Hmm.
And, we can joke and say, oh, they should have missed or whatever because, Margaret Thatcher was a horrible, horrible person. But I don't want anybody to be
Well,
killed.
this goes back to what to what I was saying before. Like people use history to justify violence, and if we just carry on doing that, Like we're all fucking doomed, aren't we? You know, and how do we resolve decades, centuries long conflicts? You know, we have got to just find a way of drawing a line in the sand and finding a peaceful way to resolve conflict,
But
which
we're all, yeah, it sounds a bit,
sounds very idealistic and hippie-ish, and you
yeah.
know, oh, let's all just get together and sing kumbaya. But surely we've got to actively work to do this. I
But
don't know
we're
what.
in such a polarized way of thinking about everything
Yeah.
now that, there is space in this conversation. Like Billy Bragg said, like this letter of support of Kneecap, it has no respect for the nuance of the situation. So there is space to discuss, hey, yeah, it's a bit shit to speak this way about killing people, but also, hey, the reason they're doing this is because they're upset that tens
Hmm.
of thousands of children are being slaughtered over the last year and a half, and people are being starved, and
Yeah.
this is the reason why this is going on. This is the reason they're speaking up.
And
So but
especially,
that conversation is not happening. It's either,
yeah.
oh, they're good or they're bad, or we're with them or we're not with them. And it was
Mm.
similar to what happened to the chicks, right, when they said, oh, we're ashamed that the president of the United States is from Texas.
Hmm.
And then all of those fundamentalists were like, oh yeah, we can't have anything to do, without thinking, hey, why are these people saying this?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's
Yeah.
because children are being killed in the Middle East.
Hmm.
It's just so,
Yeah, there was no nuance
no,
to
no,
stuff.
no, no.
Yeah, and yeah, like you say, it's just like the polarization of the way we think these days, and the need to come to an immediate conclusion about something instead of sitting with something and letting it sort of
Yeah,
percolate and let it, let our thoughts develop. We feel the need to have an instant response or an instant stance on things, and
but
it's
I do get why people like Kneecap and other activists do such attention grabbing tactics and statements, because it feels so desperate. Like, what
right.
can we do? We're seeing this happen. We're seeing a whole population genocided before our very eyes on social media, on TV.
And I was going to say, particularly, I think within the medium of music, that has traditionally always been one of the only ways that some sectors of society have been able to publicly um, demonstrate and articulate their frustration.
Yeah.
And when I say publicly, of course, the first people I think of are Public Enemy, and their critique of police aggression towards black communities, and that has been, music has been a tool for people to protest about oppression for, I don't know, decades, centuries, probably. And so, yeah, there is, yeah, it's very nuanced, like you say. Like there is absolutely the right to use music as a form of protest and to come out with these bold statements, but of course, then we have to also look at the other side of it, don't we? We have to look at the action, the power that language has, and the power
Yeah.
that words have in um, condoning violence,
I
which
mean, yes,
is
talking about Public Enemy, I think it was just yesterday at a music festival in Memphis. Public Enemy performed. I think it's called the Riverbeat Music Festival. Um, but um, they Flavor Flav and Chuck D called for Palestine to be free, and
okay.
spoke up on behalf of the people of Palestine. But um, it's just sometimes, like, people who have been standing up for social justice causes for so long. I mean, Public Enemy have been around forever, since the late 80s.
Mm.
People just ignore them, and they just get swept under the carpet. And
Yeah.
I mean, what's going to happen to somebody like, Kneecap and New, right? And they're very sort of the moment, and a lot of the music press is writing about them. I mean, Public Enemy have been around talking out against, like you said, police violence, racism, record industry, corruption for decades now, like for more than half my life they've been around. I don't know, it's very disheartening to think that I don't know I don't even know where this conversation finishes.
Once again, we have a podcast episode which basically encapsulates the enshittification of life.
The futility of life,
and just the fact that we're all kind of doomed, so that we're a sinking ship. So let's all just be kind to each other on the way down, I think is the conclusion I can draw. But that's obviously very flippant and idealistic, but genuinely I wish for the planet and all of its inhabitants, I wish we could find a way to peacefully coexist, and I have absolutely no expectation that will happen, but I just wish that we could. But,
okay, and is that your final thought for the day?
That's my final thought. And my final thought is just to cherish and acknowledge Jill Sobule as an incredible songwriter, singer, performer, human, activist she was a member of the queer community, and just to articulate my love for Jill and all that she did. And
I think also that, like, it ties in with Jill, but one of my favorite Public Enemy songs is Fight the Power, and Jill sort of encapsulated that, didn't she? She really stood up for the oppressed in so many ways. So
she was a very political singer, songwriter, and I don't think she got the roses that she deserved, to be honest. I think you should anyone listening should go and check out her work and her interviews, her live shows, everything.
Okay. Right. Well,
any final thoughts from you?
No, just fight the power. That's it. That's for me.
Fight the power. Okay. All right, folks. We'll leave it there. We'll try and put links to all the things we mentioned in the show notes. But do check out the Louis Theroux documentary, The Settlers. Anything else we need to mention?
No. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at FatGayVegan on Instagram and other platforms, or you can go to fatgayvegan.com.
Great. And you can find me online everywhere at Josh and the Jumpstarts, and listen to my music on Spotify if you wish. We'll be back in your feeds next week. Until then, be kind, be compassionate, and
free Palestine.
Free Palestine, indeed. All right, folks. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.